The rooftop of the azure spire glowed under the amber kiss of a coastal sunset, its glass railings reflecting the ocean's endless shimmer as a string quartet wove delicate notes. Beneath a velvet canopy adorned with white roses, James Harrington, the billionaire real estate tycoon whose name was synonymous with opulence and ambition, stood at the center of the gala, his tailored suit sharp against the softening light, his graying temples lending him an air of seasoned charm. He raised a flute of champagne, his voice smooth but carrying a weight that hushed the elite crowd of investors, socialites, and photographers. "To new horizons and to a love that dares us to rebuild," he said, his smile bright but not quite touching the shadows in his hazel eyes. Beside him, Lila Bennett, radiant in a silver gown that clung to her like moonlight, pressed a kiss to his cheek, her beauty a magnet for the cameras that flashed like stars. The crowd erupted in applause, glasses clinking, laughter bubbling. As the moment was immortalized, a fairy tale of second chances, a billionaire's redemption, a love story polished for the headlines. Yet, across the street, hidden in the quiet dusk of Ocean Drive, a sleek black sedan idled in the shadows of a sycamore tree, its tinted windows concealing a woman who hadn't moved in 20 minutes. Amelia Harrington, James's ex-wife, sat inside, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her dark eyes fixed on the rooftop where her past was being rewritten. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, just a simple navy coat that blended into the evening. But her presence carried a gravity that rivaled the gala's grandeur. In the back seat, her 3 children Elliot, Nora, and little Ivy slept in matching cream jackets, their small chests rising and falling in rhythm with the sedan's low. Amelia's fingers brushed against a cream-colored envelope in her purse, the wedding invitation that had arrived without a sender's name, its embossed letters spelling out James Harrington and Lila Bennett. Was it a gift or a taunt? She didn't know, but it had brought her here, to this moment, watching the man she once loved and the woman who once called her sister lift their joined hands for the cameras. 3 years ago, Lila had held her through sleepless nights, had wiped her tears after a miscarriage, stole her first hope, had promised, "I'll always be here, Amelia, no matter what." Now, Lila wore the ring Amelia once cherished, and the betrayal stung like salt in a wound that never healed. On the rooftop, James laughed on cue, his arm around Lila as he posed with a tech mogul, his charm effortless, but his glances darting to the street below, as if sensing a ghost he couldn't name. Lila, too, felt a prickle of unease, her smile faltering when she caught a glimpse of the sedan through the crowd, its dark shape a smudge against the golden evening. She dismissed it, turning back to the guests, but her hand tightened on James's arm, her nails pressing into his sleeve. The gala pulsed with life waiters gliding with trays of caviar, the quartet swelling into a crescendo, the city skyline glittering like a promise, but beneath it all, a current of dread ran through Lila's veins. She remembered the late night calls with Amelia, the shared secrets in college dorms, the matching bracelets they bought on a whim in Barcelona. How had it come to this? James leaned in, his breath warm with champagne, and whispered, "You're dazzling tonight." Lila nodded, her smile a fragile mask, but her eyes drifted back to the street, where the sedan hadn't moved. Amelia, inside, traced the invitation's letters with her thumb, her heart a tangle of grief and resolve. She wasn't here to scream or shatter the night. She was here for her children, for the truth James had buried when he walked away. The smallest of her 3, Ivy, stirred in her sleep, clutching a stuffed rabbit, and Amelia's chest tightened with a love so fierce it could outshine the rooftop's glow. She whispered to herself, "Not yet, but soon," her voice steady as marble, her gaze never leaving the man who thought he could erase her. The gala spun on, a spectacle of wealth and celebration, but across the street, in the quiet of a sedan, a mother's heart beat louder than any toast, her silence a promise that the past would not stay buried forever. Inside the black sedan, parked under the sycamore's dappled shade on Ocean Drive, Amelia Harrington sat in stillness, the weight of the moment pressing against her ribs like a held breath. The cream-colored invitation rested in her lap. Its embossed names, James Harrington and Lila Bennett, gleaming faintly in the dim light filtering through the tinted windows. Her fingers traced the letters, not out of nostalgia, but as if mapping a wound, each curve of ink a reminder of promises. Broken. In the back seat, her 3 children Elliot, Nora, and Ivy slumbered in their cream jackets, their soft faces unaware of the rooftop Gillis glitter or the storm brewing in their mother's heart. Elliot's head rested against Nora's shoulder, their dark curls mingling, while Ivy clutched her stuffed rabbit, its ear worn from her constant grip. The sedan's engine hummed low, a steady lullaby, but Amelia's eyes were sharp, locked on the Azure Spire's rooftop where silhouettes danced against the sunset. She saw James lift Lila's hand, the cameras flashing, capturing a love story. The world wanted to believe. 3 years ago, that hand had been hers to hold Lila's, her best friend, who'd sat with her through endless nights, who'd braided her hair during college all-nighters, who'd whispered, "You're stronger." Then, when Amelia's first pregnancy ended in a quiet hospital room. Now, Lila stood in Amelia's place, wearing a ring that once sat on Amelia's finger, and the betrayal cut deeper than any knife. A memory surged, unbidden. 3 years back, in their sprawling cliffside home overlooking the Pacific, Amelia, 6 months pregnant, folding tiny onesies in a nursery painted soft blue. James had stood in the doorway, his jaw tight, his voice colder than the ocean wind. "I can't do this, Amelia. I need time, space." She'd stared, disbelieving, her hands trembling over a folded blanket. "Space? I'm carrying our children." He'd looked away, refusing to meet her eyes, and said, "You'll manage. You always do." He left that night, a single bag packed, no explanation beyond a vague promise to figure it out. 2 weeks later, a friend sent her a photo. James at a charity. Gila, his arm around Lila, her smile radiant where Amelia's had been erased. Lila, who'd stopped answering her calls, who'd vanished when Amelia's belly began to show, had stepped into her life like it was a role to audition for. The pain was surgical, precise, as if they'd planned it together. Amelia didn't scream or chase them. She let the silence grow, gave birth alone, 3 tiny heartbeats becoming her world after 16 hours of labor, no name beside hers on the hospital forms. The nurse had squeezed her hand, saying, "Triplets, my goodness. You're a warrior." Amelia hadn't felt like one, not then, but she stitched together a life diapers, midnight feedings, first smiles while James built his empire and Lila wore his promises. Now, in the sedan, a folded note slipped from the invitation, its words in Lila's familiar scrawl, "You can't rewrite us." It had arrived that morning, no sender, just those words, sharp as a blade. Amelia's breath caught. It wasn't an apology but a challenge, a reminder that Lila knew the weight of her choices. Amelia's thumb hovered over her phone, a draft. Message unsent. They deserve to know him, even if he doesn't deserve them. She didn't send it, not yet. Her children stirred, Nora's eyes fluttering open. "Mommy, where are we?" She whispered, her voice small against the sedan's hum. Amelia turned, smoothing her daughter's curls. "Somewhere important, sweetheart. Rest a little more." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled, not with fear, but with purpose. She wasn't here for revenge. She was here for truth, for Elliot's curious questions about the man in the pictures, for Nora's crayon drawings of a house with 2 parents, for Avy's quiet habit of staring at strangers, searching for a face. She didn't know. On the rooftop, Lila laughed too brightly, her hand tight on James's arm as he greeted a senator. But her eyes darted to the street, catching the sedan's outline again, a shadow she couldn't shake. She remembered writing vows with Amelia for her wedding to James, promising to stand by her forever. Now, she wore Amelia's life, but the fit was wrong, like a dress too tight at the seams. James leaned in, his breath warm. "You're quiet tonight." Lila forced a smile, just taking it all in. But her heart raced, the note's words echoing. "You can't rewrite us." Amelia, in the sedan, looked at her children, their faces soft in sleep, and whispered, "This is for you." The gala's lights twinkled above, but her resolve burned brighter, a mother's love fiercer than any empire. The azure spire's rooftop pulsed with the hum of celebration, the string quartet's notes weaving through the clink of champagne, flutes and the murmur of polished conversation. But beneath the golden glow, a thread of tension tightened around Lila Bennett's heart. She stood radiant in her silver gown, her auburn hair cascading in perfect waves, her smile a practiced beacon for the cameras that followed her every move. James Harrington, her fiancé, moved effortlessly beside her, his charm a well-oiled machine, as he shook hands with a tech billionaire and laughed at a senator's quip. But his hazel eyes flicked to the street below, where the black sedan still idled, a dark smudge against the twilight. Lila felt it too, that shadow on the edge of her vision, and her fingers tightened around her champagne flute, the glass cool against her palm. She'd seen the sedan earlier, its stillness unnerving, and now, as she posed for another photo, her gaze drifted back to it, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. The note she'd found in her purse that morning, "You can't rewrite," used burned in her mind, its familiar handwriting a ghost from a past she thought she'd outrun. Lila and Amelia had been inseparable once, sharing late-night confessions in their college dorm, trading secrets over cheap wine, laughing until dawn. Lila had held Amelia's hand through her wedding to James, had sat with her in a sterile hospital room after a miscarriage stole her first chance at motherhood, had promised, "I'll never leave you alone." But 3 years ago, when Amelia's pregnancy with the triplets became real, Lila's call stopped, her texts went unanswered, and James's whispers of freedom filled the space where friendship had been. Now, Lila wore his ring, stood in his spotlight, but the weight of Amelia's absence pressed against her ribs like a bruise. She excused herself from a cluster of guests, her heels clicking on the polished floor as she slipped into a private suite, the door locking behind her with a soft click. Alone, she pulled the note from her clutch, its words stark in the dim light. "You can't rewrite us." Her breath hitched, her fingers trembling as she traced Amelia's handwriting, the same script that had penned birthday cards, shared journal entries, the vows Lila had helped craft for Amelia's wedding. A memory flashed Amelia, radiant in white, whispering, "You're my family now," as Lila adjusted her veil. Lila's stomach twisted. She believed James when he said Amelia had left him, that she was unstable, that she'd wanted out. But the sedan outside, the note in her hand, told a different story. On the rooftop, James's laughter rang out, but it landed half a second too late, his hand brushing his graying temples as he scanned the crowd, searching for something he couldn't name. He'd seen the sedan too, just for a moment, and the sight had stirred a flicker of unease, a memory of Amelia's voice, soft but unyielding. "The truth doesn't vanish, James." He shook it off, turning to a media mogul with a grin, but his fingers trembled slightly as he poured another glass of champagne. Lila, in the suite, leaned against the vanity, her reflection staring back with eyes that held too much. She remembered the summer in Barcelona with Amelia, the matching bracelets they bought from a street vendor, the promise to always be there. Now, she was marrying the man who'd walked away from Amelia, pregnant and alone, and the guilt gnawed at her, sharp and relentless. A knock startled her, James's voice, low and concerned. "Lila, you okay in there?" She stuffed the note back into her clutch, smoothed her gown, and opened the door, her smile a fragile shield. "Just needed a moment," she said, her voice steady but her heart racing. James studied her, his eyes searching, and for a moment she wanted to ask, what did you do to her? Why didn't you tell me? But she didn't. She looped her arm through his, returning to the gala, where the cameras resumed their relentless dance. Across the street, Amelia sat in the sedan, her children still asleep, their soft breaths a reminder of why she was here. She held her phone, the unsent message glowing. They deserve to know him, even if he doesn't deserve them. Her thumb hovered over the send button, but she paused, her gaze lifting to the rooftop, where Lila's silver gown caught the light like a beacon. Amelia's heart ached, not for what she'd lost, but for what her children might never have a father who stayed. She whispered to herself, "He'll see you soon." Her voice a vow to Elliot, Nora, and Ivy, whose faces carried James's eyes, his crooked smile. The gala spun on, its glamour a thin veil over the truth, but in the sedan, Amelia's resolve grew, a mother's love sharper than any lie, ready to pierce the night. The seaside chapel glowed under the morning sun, its ivy-covered arches framing a scene of delicate perfection, with pastel-clad guests sipping champagne from a marble fountain and a string quartet tuning up for the ceremony that would bind James Harrington and Lila Bennett in a story the world wanted to believe. Inside, Lila stood at the altar, her silver gown shimmering, her veil lifted to reveal eyes that flickered with unease, her bouquet of white roses trembling in her hands. James adjusted his cufflinks across the room, his smile polished but his jaw tight, as if bracing for a storm only he could sense. The guests murmured, their designer shoes soft on the plush carpet, the air thick with anticipation for the billionaire's new beginning. Then, a ripple of whispers broke the calm as the wedding planner, her face pale, approached Lila with a folded note. "Miss Bennett," she whispered, "there's a woman outside in a sedan. She says she's not here to disrupt, just to be seen." Lila's heart stuttered, her fingers crushing the note as she read, "Amelia is here." She turned, her eyes meeting James's, and for a moment time froze. James's face drained of color, his hands flexing at his sides, caught between flight and denial. Before anyone could speak, the chapel doors opened, and Amelia Harrington stepped across the threshold, a navy dress simple but commanding, her presence a quiet thunder that silenced the organ's hum. Behind her, Elliot, Nora, and Ivy followed, their cream jackets pristine, their small hands clutching each other's, their faces curious but unafraid. Elliot, the eldest, held a single daisy he'd picked from the path outside. Nora's braid was slightly askew, a testament to her morning excitement. Ivy clung to her stuffed rabbit, her wide eyes scanning the strange, glittering crowd. Every head turned, phones lifted, a guest whispered, "Is that her?" Amelia met Lila's gaze, not with fury, but with a steady, one resolve, and spoke, her voice clear and even, cutting through the chapel like a blade. "I didn't come to stop this. I came so he could see them, so they could see him." The children looked at James, their faces mirrors of his own, his hazel eyes, his crooked smile, but their expressions held no recognition, only the innocent curiosity of youth. Lila stepped down from the altar, her gown whispering against the carpet, and moved toward Amelia, passing James without a glance. She stopped inches from the children, her breath catching as she counted them. 1, 2, 3, each a living echo of the man she'd promised to marry. "James," she said, her voice sharp but cracking on his name, "do you know them?" He stood frozen, his lips parting but no words coming, his empire's weight crumbling under the gaze of 3 small truths. Lila's voice rose, trembling now. "Do you know your own children?" Ivy shrank behind Amelia's leg, startled by the shout, and Amelia knelt, whispering softly, "It's okay, sweetheart. We're just visiting." The other two stood still, Elliot's daisy now limp in his hand, Nora's eyes darting between her mother and the man who felt like a stranger. The guests were a frozen tableau, some recording, others whispering, the air thick with the scandal unfolding. James finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Layla, you don't understand." She whirled on him, her bouquet dropping to the floor. "Then make me understand." A long silence followed, heavy as the chapel's stained glass. Amelia stood again, her chin lifted, and reached into her handbag, pulling out a folded envelope. "This is the paternity petition," she said, her tone unwavering. "The court date is set. I didn't come for money or a scene. I came for their names, for their truth." She placed the envelope on the front pew, its weight louder than any vow, and turned to her children, gesturing gently. "Come on, loves, let's go." They followed, Elliot still clutching his daisy, Nora's hand in Ivy's, their small steps steady as they left the chapel. The silence they left behind was a vacuum, sucking the air from James's perfect world. Lila stared at the envelope, then at James, her eyes no longer those of a bride but of a woman seen clearly for the first time. The guests began to shift, their murmurs growing, phones still raised as the quartet faltered, notes dying in the air. James sank onto the pew, his hands covering his face, the petition untouched beside him. Outside, Amelia buckled her children into the sedan, their faces calm but questioning, and as the engine hummed to life, she looked back at the chapel one last time, not for James, but for the woman she'd been broken, but never erased. The doors closed behind her, and the ceremony unraveled, a fairy tale shattered by the quiet courage of a mother who refused to let her children be forgotten. The chapel's silence lingered like a held breath, its stained glass glow dimming as guests filtered out, their whispers sharp with shock, their designer shoes clicking across the marble like a retreating tide. Lila Bennett stood alone in the bridal suite, her silver gown now a heavy costume, its shimmer mocking the chaos in her heart. The bouquet of white roses lay abandoned on the floor, petals scattered where she dropped it, and her reflection in the gilded mirror showed smudged mascara and eyes that no longer recognized the woman staring back. James Harrington remained in the chapel, slumped on the front pew, the paternity petition untouched beside him, its folded edges a quiet accusation. The ceremony had dissolved without a word, no music, no vows, just the weight of Amelia's presence and the three small faces that had unraveled his empire in minutes. Layla's hands trembled as she pulled the note from her clutch again. "You can't rewrite us," its words now a confession of her own complicity. She'd believed James's stories, his claims that Amelia had left him, that she was unstable, that he'd been the victim of a fractured marriage. But those eyes, Elliot's, Nora's, Ivy's, carried James's hazel gleam, his crooked smile, and no lie could erase their truth. Lila sank onto a velvet chair, her mind replaying the past. College nights with Amelia, laughing over shared dreams, the summer they got matching bracelets in Barcelona, the hospital room where she'd held Amelia's hand after a miscarriage, promising, "I'm here for you always." Yet, when Amelia needed her most, pregnant and abandoned, Lila had chosen James's charm, his promises, his world of glass towers over the friend who'd been her anchor. The guilt was a stone in her chest, heavy and unyielding. Outside, the sedan was gone, Amelia and her children vanishing as quietly as they'd arrived. But their absence left a void that echoed louder than the chapel bells. Later that day, Lila sat in a quiet seaside cafe, the ocean's murmur a soft backdrop as she waited, her hands wrapped around an untouched coffee. Amelia arrived, no makeup, no pretense, just the same navy coat and a calm that felt like strength, forged in fire. They sat across from each other, the silence between them thick but not hostile. Two women bound by a shared past, and a man who'd betrayed them both. Lila spoke first, her voice low. "You knew he'd never tell me about them." Amelia's eyes softened, but her reply was steady. "I didn't come to tell you, Lila. I came so he'd see them, just once." Lila nodded, her throat tight, and asked, "Why didn't you ruin him years ago? You could have." Amelia leaned back, her gaze drifting to the sea. "I thought he might look for them someday." He didn't. The weight of that truth landed like a wave. And Lila's eyes welled, not with tears, but with the ache of realization. She reached into her purse and slid her engagement ring across the table, its diamond catching the cafe's dim light. "Give this to Nora or Ivy," she said, her voice breaking, "so they know what it's worth and what it isn't." Amelia stared at the ring, her expression unreadable, then shook her head. "They don't need his reminders. They have me." Lila swallowed, her hand retreating, and whispered, "I thought I stole him from you." Amelia's lips curved, not a smile but something. "Gentler. You didn't steal him, Lila. He gave himself away." For a moment, they were just two women who'd loved the same man and paid for it in different ways. Their silence, a bridge rebuilt from broken trust. Days later, a grainy security video leaked online, time-stamped 4 years ago at a coastal clinic. It showed James, in a tailored suit, handing an envelope to a nurse, his face cold as he walked away from the hallway where Amelia was in labor. The footage spread like wildfire, trending by noon with headlines screaming, "Billionaire bribed clinic to erase his children." James's PR team scrambled, calling it misleading and out of context, but the damage was done. His board called an emergency meeting, stocks dipped, investors fled, and the empire he built on charm began to fracture. Lila didn't speak to the press. Her silence was statement enough. She packed her bags that night, leaving the ring on James's desk. No goodbye." Amelia, meanwhile, returned to her modest rental, where Elliot drew dinosaurs, Nora practiced spelling butterfly, and Ivy sang to her rabbit. She didn't watch the news, didn't answer the media's calls, but her friend Clara, who'd stood by her through it all, brought updates. "You could sue him," Clara said, watching the frenzy unfold online. Amelia folded a tiny sweater, her voice soft. "I don't want his money. I want their truth to be seen." The cafe meeting had shifted something in Lila, and as she walked away, she whispered, "I'm sorry we were made to think we were enemies." Amelia nodded, her eyes warm for the first time in years. The ring stayed on the table, unclaimed, a symbol of a life neither woman needed anymore. The sun dipped low over the small coastal town of Haven's End, casting a golden sheen across the modest home where Amelia Harrington stood in a paint-splattered smock, helping Elliot mix blues and yellows into a vibrant ocean green on a canvas. In her sunlit art studio, the room buzzed with the quiet chaos of creation. Nora across the hall, her nose buried in a book, sounding out butterfly with fierce determination. Ivy on a stool, sculpting a lopsided claybird with her tiny hands. And the faint echo of children's laughter drifting through the open window from the beach below, where Clara's kids played tag with the waves. Amelia's home was no mansion, its walls lined with crayon drawings and thrift store frames, but it brimmed with a warmth that no penthouse could mimic. The media frenzy over James Harrington's scandal had faded to a dull hum, his empire crumbling under the weight of that leaked clinic video, his bribe to erase his children now a public wound that bled investors and boardroom trust. Amelia didn't watch the news, didn't read the headlines screaming Harrington's fall, didn't answer the reporters who called, chasing her story like vultures. She was too busy teaching Elliot to hold a brush, helping Nora write her name, wiping clay from Ivy's cheeks. Clara, her steadfast friend who'd stood by her through the chapel confrontation, arrived one Saturday with a box of cupcakes. Her eyes bright with news. James's company lost another contract, she said, setting the box on the kitchen counter, its surface cluttered with crayon hearts and a photo of the triplets at the beach. They say he's in London, maybe hiding. Amelia poured coffee, her smile faint but steady. I don't care where he is, Clara. He's not here, and that's enough. Outside, the children ran down the hill toward the ocean, their laughter rising like a melody, and Amelia watched them, her heart full of a peace she'd fought for, not in courtrooms, but in the quiet moments of bedtime stories and bandaged knees. Months ago, in the chapel, she'd walked away with her children, leaving behind a paternity petition and a truth too heavy for James to carry. She hadn't sued, hadn't sought his wealth, only the acknowledgement of Elliot, Nora, and Ivy's existence, a name, a place in the world he'd tried to erase. The viral video had done the rest, its grainy frames exposing James's betrayal to a world that loved to tear down its idols. In his flagship penthouse, now dim and silent, James sat alone, his tie loosened, his desk bare except for an unopened envelope, delivered weeks ago with no return address. Inside was a single sheet, torn at the corner, covered in crayon scrawl. Asterisk, dear Mr. Harrington, Mom says we don't need you, but we drew this so you remember us. Elliot likes dinosaurs, Nora can spell big words, Ivy runs fast. By dot asterisk below, 3 signatures. Elliot, Nora, Ivy, each with a crooked heart and a drawing of 4 stick figures holding hands, one standing apart with a sad face and a question mark. James stared at it, his hands shaking, the city skyline beyond his window no longer his to command. He hadn't returned to the penthouse in weeks. Some said he was abroad. Others whispered of rehab or exile. But the truth was simpler. He was unraveling, his reflection in the glass showing a man exposed not just to the world, but to himself. Lila, too, had vanished from the spotlight. Her engagement dissolved in the chapel's aftermath. No press release, no explanation, just a quiet exit from James's world. She'd left a ring on his desk, its diamond dull without her, and moved to a small apartment up the coast, where she taught yoga and wrote in a journal that held more truth than her old life ever had. She'd met Amelia once more, weeks after the cafe, and said, I'm sorry he made us enemies, her voice soft with regret. Amelia had nodded, her eyes warm, and replied, We're not enemies now. That was enough. In Haven's End, Amelia stood on her porch, watching her children dance against the surf, their shadows long and unbroken in the fading light. Clara sat beside her, cupcake crumbs on her lap, and asked, Do they remember him? Amelia's gaze stayed on the ocean, where Ivy waved, her rabbit tucked under one arm. They remember enough, and forget what they need to. A breeze carried sand and salt, and Amelia brushed flour from her hands, remnants of a morning baking with Nora. I think we're finally home, she said, her voice steady, not a victory cry, but a quiet truth. The skyline of James's city blinked faintly in the distance, too far to matter, and as the sun sank into the sea, Amelia's kingdom stood firm, built not on glass towers, but on crayon courage and a mother's love that no scandal could touch. The triplets ran back, Elliot holding a shell, Nora chanting a new word, Ivy giggling, and Amelia knelt to meet them, her heart a lighthouse guiding them through any storm.